Hi, in this video, we are going to talk about one-step inequalities. So before going forward, make sure that you understand what an inequality is and how to graph an inequality. You can look in Google Classroom. There are two videos that cover the definition and introduction and graphing. So in this one, we're going to talk a little bit vocabulary. We're going to go over and review what we did with one-step equations. Then we're going to talk about how to solve inequalities using plus or minus, multiply, divide, and go over a special case that's going to be important going forward when we're working with inequalities. So first, let's look a little bit at the vocabulary. So we need to know, what does solve mean? You're going to get the directions to solve on a lot of problems. So solve just means that we are going to find the value for the variable that makes a statement true. So in this case, we're looking for the values of the variable that make the inequalities true. Um, and that uh, and that means that what we're going to do is isolate the variable. So when we isolate the variable, that just means that we're going to get it by itself. Now, it's going to be important when we're solving inequalities to know the difference between simplifying something that's on a side and introducing an operation in order to solve it. So simplify just means that we're going to do our adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. And this will make a little more sense as we get into the actual solving inequalities. All right, so first let's review one-step equations. Now remember, one-step equations, again, the directions on one-step equations usually say to solve. So what that means is we are going to get the variable by itself or isolate the variable. And in order to do that, we're going to move everything from the side with the variable to the other side. And remember, when we move something, we're going to do the opposite. So if we go through our steps, we're going to make our line, make the wall at the equal sign. Now, all this does is it helps us keep track of what belongs on each side. Sometimes it's difficult to know when we talk about do it to both sides, what sides are we talking about? So we're talking about the opposite sides of that equal sign. So we notice here, this is our variable. So that's going to stay there. What we need to move is the 4. So this is a positive 4. In order to move that, we subtract the 4 from both sides. This cancels out the 4 minus 4. That's equal to 0. So that we don't need that on the side anymore. It leaves us with the x. This is still equals. And on this side, we have 10 minus 4. 10 minus 4 is 6. Usually we would check it at this point, but because this video is about inequalities, we're going to skip that step for here. Second one, again, we make our line to show the sides of the equation. We see that we're trying to get this x by itself. So we need to move this 3. So we look and see, how is it related to the x here? 3x means 3 times x. So in order to do the opposite of times 3, we're going to divide both sides by 3. We're going to show this, it looks like a fraction. Remember, fractions just division. So 3 divided by 3 is 1, and all we're left with is that 1x on this side. We still have that equal sign. The line represents the equals. And then we have a negative 15 divided by 3. Negative divided by a positive is negative, and 15 divided by 3 is negative 5. Last example here, we make the line to separate the sides at the equal sign. My goal is to isolate the p. So this means p divided by 5. So we can get rid of this by doing the opposite, which is, sorry, I don't have a lot of room, multiply by 5. You can also think of this like a fraction. And remember, if you multiply by the denominator, you're left with the numerator. So 5 divided by 5 is 1. We're left with the p. Negative 2 times 5 gives me the negative 10. So that's just a quick review on one-step equations. Now, what we're talking about now are inequalities. So these are the inequalities. They show that one side is different from the other by our symbols here. So x plus 7 is less than or equal to 2. Now we're going to do the same thing we did with equations. Here's our separate sides. Let's make that a different color. So we've got the two sides of the inequality. And remember that my goal is to isolate the x. So I can see here I've got this 7 that I need to move to the other side. So I'm going to do the opposite. The opposite of plus 7 is minus 7. Now this leaves us with 7 minus 7 is 0. So we have the x alone, less than or equal to 2 minus 7 makes this negative 5. And that's our solution there. So this says that all the numbers x that are less than or equal to negative 5, so that would be negative 5, negative 6, negative 7, plus all the numbers in between, negative 5.5, etc., etc., etc. So all of those numbers are going to satisfy this inequality. Next one, same thing. We break this into two separate sides. My goal is to isolate that n. So I need to move the negative 4. In order to move a negative 4, I do the opposite, which is positive 4, which leaves me with n and 7. And that line represents the inequality of greater than. So with inequalities that take plus or minus to solve, you do them exactly the same way that we did with equations. We can multiply and divide to get a variable by itself. Going through our process here, we're going to do the same thing. We break it at the inequality sign. That just helps us see the two different sides. Remember, our goal is to get the n by itself. So we have to move this 4. Remember, this is 4 times n, so we do the opposite, which is divide by 4. So 20 divided by 4 gives me 5. Let's change that color. So we get 5. 4 divided by 4 is 1, which leaves me 1 times n, or just the n. We've got our inequality sign there, and we're left with 5 is greater than or equal to n. Now, same thing, we break it apart at the inequality sign. Remember that my goal is to get this r by itself, so I am going to do the opposite. So r divided by 2, the opposite is times 2. Now this leaves me with 2 divided by 2, leaves me with the r. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. And I got that less than or equal to. So my solution here is all the numbers that are less than or equal to negative 8. Now this brings us to the special case. So if we've got this inequality, um, we don't want to leave a negative variable. So one way we could do this is we could add that t to both sides. Now this leaves me with a t plus 5 is greater than this negative t plus t is left with 0. And then we would subtract the 5, leaving me with a t is greater than negative 5. Now, if you look at this, the, the, the inequality pointing to the variable, it flips. So we've moved that t to the left side, we've moved the number to the right side. So basically that's what we did. But in doing that, this inequality sign, it actually flips. So what we need to remember is that when we multiply or divide by a negative, we're going to flip this inequality sign. So 2 is greater than or equal to negative, let's make it negative 4x. So we're going to solve this the same way. We break the inequality in two. We know that we're trying to isolate this x, so we're going to divide by a negative 4. Now notice the yellow are the things that I'm doing to the inequality. So I'm dividing by a negative. That means I need to remember to flip this inequality sign. So this would be my solution. We'll go to another example here. Solving negative 2x is greater than or equal to 10. I break my inequality in two parts. Remember, my goal is to isolate the x. So I'm going to divide by a negative 2. This leaves me with my x, and 10 divided by negative 2 is negative 5. I'm dividing by a negative, so I need to flip the inequality sign. Break the problem in two. Remember your goal. Identify what's happening here is a divide by negative 3. So I'm going to multiply by a negative 3. Notice what I'm introducing or what I'm doing to the problem is multiplying by a negative. So this is going to cancel the negative 3 and the negative 3, multiply by negative 3 and divide by negative 3. Sorry, guys. And we're left with the b. Negative 2 times negative 3 gives me a positive 6, and we flip that inequality sign. So pause the video for a second, make an attempt at these 5 problems, and then come back and see the solutions. All right, we are back. So our first problem, our A, 2w is greater than or equal to negative 12. We break our problem in two parts. Remember, our goal is to get the x by itself. So x times 2, I'm going to do the opposite, which is divide by 2. So this side, we're left with the x. Now on this side, we get negative 12 divided by positive 2. This gives me a negative 6. Now, look at this. We're dividing by a positive number. The yellow number is positive. So it doesn't matter that the 12 is negative or that my division gives me a negative value. We're dividing by a positive number. which means that inequality sign stays the way it was. Next one is B. So we get our x plus 5 is less than or equal to 2. I'm trying to isolate my x, so I break the problem in two parts. Remember my goal. And what I'm going to do is do the opposite of plus 5. So that would be a minus 5. Now remember, plus and minus is not our special case. So all we have to do is isolate that x, perform the operation. 2 minus 5 gives me negative 3. And plus or minus, we keep the inequality sign the same. C, we have 10 is greater than negative n over 3. So we break our problem in two parts. Remember, our goal is to get that n by itself. So this is a fraction. We can multiply by the denominator. We can also look at this. This is a divide by negative 3. So the opposite of divide by negative 3 is to multiply by negative 3. And we do that to both sides of the equation. So negative 3 times 10 gives me negative 30. When we multiply by the denominator, it cancels, which leaves us with n. Now pay attention to the yellow. This is what we introduced to the problem. This is a multiply by a negative. That's our special case, so we flip that inequality sign. D, we have negative 27 is less than or equal to negative 3 times s. So we break our problem in two parts. Remember, our goal is to isolate that s. So we have to move the negative 3. So this is an s times negative 3. We do the opposite, which is divide by negative 3. Negative 27 divided by negative 3 is a positive 9. These will cancel, leaving us with just the s. Now, the yellow is division by negative 3. This is our special case. So this changes to 9 is greater than or equal to s. And our last example, E. We have 8n is greater than negative 24. So we again break our problems in two parts. Make sure that we remember what we're trying to do is isolate that n. In order to isolate the n, I'm going to do the opposite operation. So the opposite of times 8 is divide by 8. And simplifying now, I'm left with n on one side. A negative 24 divided by 8 gives me negative 3. So now to decide whether we flip or not, we're dividing by a positive number here. So we don't flip. And that is how we multiply, or that's how we solve one-step inequalities. Remember, the most important part here is when you multiply or divide by a negative number, remember to flip the inequality sign. As always, if you didn't understand anything in this video, Go back and check the previous ones. That might help you with some vocabulary or the situation. Um, and if that doesn't help, come see me, office hours. You can reply in Google Classroom, Remind, or by email. And I will see you in class.